All right, hello everybody. So today we are going to continue our discussion in Chapter 8, Section 6. And if you recall in the last couple of videos, I showed you how to factor quadratic trinomials. And in the first video that I showed, we only discussed what to do, or how to factor, I should say, expressions that both had a positive sign for the coefficients. And in the last video, in the second video of this section, I then showed you how to deal with expressions that had a positive and a negative, or had two negatives. And because the outcome of those, one of the factors would be positive and one of the factors would be negative in both of those scenarios. So the last one that we need to discuss is this one right here. What do you do if the first coefficient, or I should say the middle coefficient, is a negative and then the last coefficient is positive? So I'm going to show you a few examples of that right now. So looking at this first trinomial that we have, this quadratic trinomial, you can see we're started out just like we do every other one, that we need two numbers that add to be negative 10, but then they need to multiply to be positive. So this is where it gets a little tricky. We need two numbers, they need to multiply together to become positive. Now, how does that happen? Well, if both of the numbers are positive and they multiply, it'll give us a positive answer. But both also, if both of them are negative and we multiply them together, a negative times a negative is also a positive. And keep in mind, not only do they need to multiply to be positive, they have to add to be negative. So in this scenario, you are going to need to pick both negative numbers, because a negative times a negative is a positive, but a negative plus a negative is a negative. So looking through here, we have positive 21. So the factors of 21 are 1 and 21, or 3 and 7. But remember, they both have to be negative because they have to multiply to be positive, but they have to add to be negative 10. So in order for them to add to be negative 10, both of them are going to need to be negative. And in this case, negative 3 and negative 7 are our two numbers. Negative 3 minus 7 is negative 10, and negative 3 times negative 7 is positive 21. So now we can go ahead and write our factors. We know that x is our variable, so we put that first, and then we write both of our numbers, negative 3 and negative 7. And there it is. That's your final answer. If I wanted to, I could FOIL these together like this and write out my terms and see that I would get the original expression up here. I'm not going to FOIL that out. I showed that in the first video, which you can go back and watch if you're a little confused on what to do there. So here again, we have a problem where the middle term is a negative and then the last term is a positive. So when this happens, that tells us that both of our numbers that we're going to get are negative. So we need factors of 24, which is 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, and then 4 and 6. So there's all of our factors of 24. Remember, they have to add to be negative 14, but they need to multiply to be positive 24. So in this case, all of the pairs will be negative, once again, because they have to multiply to be positive, but they have to add to be negative. So which of those are going to give me negative 14 when I add them up? Well, these two right here. Negative 2 minus 12 is negative 14. So when I write my ordered pairs, my factors, I will start by writing the parentheses, followed by the variable, and then I'll draw in my numbers, minus 2 and minus 12, just like that. And now you have your answer. So I'm going to show you a couple more of these, actually 4 more. Once again, we have a negative for the middle term and then a positive for the end term. So we will end up with both of the numbers being negative because they have to add to be negative, but they need to multiply to be positive. So 64, 1 and 64, 2 and 32. 3 will not go in because 6 plus 4 is 10, and 10 is not divisible by 3. Therefore, 64 is not divisible by 3. 64 is divisible by 4. It will go in 16 times. 5 will not go in. 6 will not go in because 2 and 3 both do not divide into 64. 7 does not go in. If you go through your 7 times table, 7 times 7 is 49. 7 times 8 is 56. 7 times 9 is 63. So that won't work. 8 will go into 64. 8 times 8. So we know we are done because there's no more numbers there. So there are all of our factors of 64. Remember, we need them to multiply to be a positive 64, but they have to add to be negative. That means they're both going to be negative. So I'm putting a negative sign on each of those. Now we need to pick the pair that will add up to be negative 16, which is negative 8 and negative 8. So when we do that, we can go ahead and write our parentheses. I can put my y's there, put a minus 8, put a minus 8. And there you go. It's factored. Do another one. You can see that these last numbers are bigger, which is what, in my opinion, makes them a little harder because there's more factors that you have to consider. Once again, they need to add to be positive. They need to add to be negative 15. They need to multiply to be positive 50. So we're going to go through the factors of 50, 1 and 50, 2 and 25. 3 will not go into 50. 4 will not go into 50. 5 will. 5 and 10. 6 will not go into 50. 7 will not go into 50. 8 will not go into 50. And 9 will not go into 50. And we're at 10, which we already have here. So we know that we are done. We found all the factors of 50. Remember, in order to multiply to be positive and add to be negative, they both need to be negative. And so now we're looking for the pair that adds up to be negative 15. And that will be these two right there. So negative 5 and negative 10 will give me negative 15 when you add them together. So we will write our parentheses. We will put our variable at the beginning. And then we will write in our negative 5 and negative 10. And we're done. It's fully factored. So I have two more examples to show you, and they are a little different than the last ones. You can see all the last ones had a negative first and then a positive. These ones do not have a negative first. They have a positive first and then a negative, or they have a negative and a negative. So these are other scenarios that we've had in the prior video. So let's go through these two. We need two numbers that add to be positive 1 and multiply to be negative 6. So let's write down our factors of 6. 1 and 6, 2 and 3. Now, they need to multiply to be negative, but they have to add to be positive. The only way you can multiply to be a negative number is if one of the numbers is negative. So we need to figure out which number should be negative. So when you add them together, it gives me positive 1. So looking at this pair right here, if I make it a negative 2 and a positive 3, when those two multiply together, I get negative 6. But when they add together, I get positive 1. So those are the two numbers that I need. So I will write parentheses. I'll put in my variable. And then I will write minus 2 plus 3. And we're done. That's how you do it. Last one, both of these are negative. It's a little bit different. They need to add to be positive 1. They need to multiply to be negative 6. My factors of 6 are 1 and 6, 2 and 3. Once again, they're multiplying to be a negative 6, which means one number of the pair has to be negative. It also has to add up to be negative 1. So looking at these two, if the 2 is positive and the 3 is negative, when I multiply them, it will give me negative 6. But when I add them together, it will give me -1. So there are 2 answers. So we'll write our parentheses. We'll put our variables, and then we will put, our correct numbers, 2 and -3. So that's what you have for that. If you guys have any questions, as always, feel free to email me. Have a great day.